Hello, this is a video on how to play the board game Cribbage. And so Cribbage is actually a very popular board game. What you'll need is a Cribbage board. If you don't have a Cribbage board, there are tutorials on how to make one. You could essentially just use a really large piece of paper and label it with dots and colors accordingly. But basically, it is a very long and complicated game, and so we'll sort of explain it bit by bit, do a bit of a demonstration as we go. So the actual objective of Cribbage is to be the first player to get 121 points. And so there are three actual, phases of gameplay. And so those three phases of gameplay are the deal, the play, and the show. And so here we'll be playing Cribbage with 2 players. You can play with more than 2 players. You can play with multiple players. And there are different rules. People play Cribbage in different ways. We will be using a specific set of rules for the version played with 2 players. There are a lot of rules, so just beware, but I'll try to go through them as smoothly as I can. So the game starts with both players drawing a card from the deck to find out who the dealer is, right? So, I guess it doesn't really, someone just picks first, right, in terms of drawing this card here, but that's how you sort of figure out who the dealer is. So both players draw a card, and the player that gets the lower card is the dealer. So I'll draw a random card here. I got an ace. Santa drew a queen, therefore I am the dealer, right? Now, in the odd chance that we drew equal cards there, so let's say Santa drew a queen and I drew a queen as well. In that case, we would simply draw another card, right? And we keep drawing until the dealer is determined. This way of determining the dealer is only done in the first round of Cribbage. In subsequent rounds, the dealer alternates between the 2 players. So, when we are figuring out the dealer, that's only for the first round. To keep it fair, we alternate. So, since I'm the dealer in this first round, in the next round, we will see that Santa will be the dealer here. Now, the dealer deals 6 cards to himself and 6 cards to the opponent. So as you can see, I have 6 cards. Santa likewise has 6 cards. Each player then chooses 2 cards from their hand to put face down in what we call the crib. So the crib belongs to the dealer and is used at the end of the round to gain extra points. Which cards you choose to put in the crib is very important, as it affects how many points you can get in later parts of the game. Okay, and so we won't go into what cards we're actually putting in. We'll simply just pick 2 random cards to put in. But after we go through the later phases of the game, you'll see why it's important to carefully pick the 2 cards you're putting in the crib. So, and we'll refer back to the crib when that time comes. But for right now, I'll just pick 2 cards to put in the crib. Let's go with 5 and 7. So I will put them in the crib. So that I have 2. Now Santa put 2 cards in my crib, and I put 2 cards in my crib. Okay, so let's just talk about what just happened here. A lot just happened here. So at this point, each player would have 4 cards in their hand. Okay, the crib has 4 cards, 2 from me, 2 from Santa. And obviously, depending on the number of players, I guess the relative number of cards would change. So just look up a quick cribbage guide because it does slightly differ depending on the number of players you have. So at this point, each player has 4 cards in their hand, right? And the crib itself has 4 cards. The deck of cards is then put to the side, and the player who is not the dealer, in this case Santa, cuts the deck and then reveals the top card. So that's what we saw here. Santa cut the deck, which means basically think of it taking a knife and cutting the deck in half at a certain, or not in half, at a certain point, and simply revealing the top card. This deck is referred to as the starter or the cut. Now, if the starter is a jack, then the dealer immediately scores 2 points. So the top card in this case is a 3 of clubs, right? The top card on the deck. It's not a jack, so the dealer does not score 2 points. So in this case, I still have 0 points, as we can see here. This is also commonly referred to as 2 for his heels. Okay, it's just a saying. And so once the starter card has been shown, in this case 3 of clubs, the players are ready to proceed to the next part of the game. So that was the first part of the game, known as the deal. We're now moving into the second phase of the game, known as the play. The player who is not the dealer, in this case Santa, and sometimes it's also referred to as the pwn. I'll just refer to it as Santa because I feel like that's easier. Starts by laying down a card on the table and announcing its value. So in this case, Santa lays down a jack of spades on the table and announces its value, which is 10. So just a heads up, aces are counted as 1, face cards are counted as 10, and all other cards are their normal value. So if you put down a queen, he would likewise announce 10. If you put down a king, he would likewise announce 10. If you put down an ace, he would announce 1. So Santa, or the pwn, the non-dealer, plays the first card and announces it. Okay. Then it's the dealer's turn to lay down a card and announce the cumulative value of the cards on the table. So let's say he laid down a jack. If I lay down a 4, I'd announce 14 because the total value of the cards on the table is 14. At this point, we go back and forth. Santa laid down a 5. 10 plus 4 plus 5 is 19. So the total value of the cards on the table is 19. Therefore, Santa announces the number 19. This continues. We continue going back and forth until one player cannot lay down another card without the cumulative value on the table going over 31. Right? So the magic number is 31. The player then says go. And so the player then says go, the player who cannot lay down a card without going over 31. And the other player then continues to lay down their cards until they cannot also lay down a card without going over 31. Then the other player also says go. So essentially, if it's your turn and you can't lay down a card without it going over 31, you announce go. If it's the other player's turn and they can't lay down a card without going over 31, they also announce go. Right, so that's what we'll do here. The value is 29. And I don't think Santa has a 2. So, okay. So, okay, I didn't think he had a 2, but we need to talk about what just happened here. This is very important. So, the player who laid down the last card will score 1 point if the total value is under 31, but 2 points if the value on the table is exactly 31. So, Santa laid down the last card, right? Notice how Santa laid down the card and he got it to 31. In that case, I wouldn't be able to lay down a card without having the value go over 31, right? The value is already at 31. There's no such thing as a 0 card. So I wouldn't be able to lay down any card. So if a player gets the card value to 31 exactly, then they score 2 points for that. However, if you end up in a situation where both players say go, meaning that both players are unable to lay down a card without it going over or touching 31, without it going over 31, sorry, then the player who last laid down a card gets 1 point. So what do I mean by that? Let's say I laid down this 10, and Santa, luckily he had a 2 because he's Santa, but let's say he didn't, and the card value was at 29, and let's say the lowest card he had was a 3, right? Then he wouldn't be able to put that down. And in that scenario, we both announced go, and since it's not at exactly 31, the player who last played the last card on the table gets 1 point. So let's say this 10 was the last card on the table and Santa announced go, then I would get 1 point because I played the 10 of hearts, I played the last card on the table. So once that happens, when a player either scores 1 point or 2 points, so we notice that Santa scored 2 points here, I scored 0. We reset the count to 0, right? So now the count on the board is 0, and we continue playing with our remaining cards, starting with the player who did not lay down the last card, right? So in this case, the board values are set to 0. Santa put down the last card, which is a 2. Therefore, we alternate back to me. So it's just a simple regular sequence, but the total resets to 0. Now, I'll lay down an 8, he lays down a 10, okay? And I lay down a 10. So I get 1 point for playing the last card, right? Because I played the last card. Remember, that's sort of how it works, right? You get 1 point for playing the last card. So the 31 is just an arbitrary number that motivates a reset, right? When you get closer to 31, you have to reset. But after a player hits 31, or after you reset, right, when both players say go, you simply continue playing. And the rules still are the same, right? If a player somehow hits 31 again, they get 2 points. Otherwise, the player who last played the last card on the table gets a singular point. In this case, I was the player who last played the last card on the table, which is a 10 of spades, so I get 1 point for playing the last card. Overall, the scoring in the play is not too hard, but there are actually several ways to score points during the play phase. It's based on how you actually lay your cards on the table. So points can be scored as you lay down your cards. Okay, so let us. Okay, so we'll go over the calculation here. But just as an example during the play phase, let's say you lay down a card and your opponent lays down a matching card on top of it. So let's say I lay down a 5 and Santa lays down a 5 on top of it. Santa scores a pair. Okay, so notice right here, right? A heart and a clover here. So Santa scores a pair and he gets 2 points for that, right? It's the player who lays down the card. I guess the player who scores it is the player who plays it, right? The player who most recently plays it. So the player who scores a pair is not the player who plays the first card in the pair. It's the player who plays the second card in the pair, right? So if I just play a 5 of spades and Santa plays a 5 of hearts after me, then he would score for the pair. So notice how players were always announcing the cumulative value of the cards on the table when we lay down a new card, right? And if you score points, you announce the points as well, right? So let's say you're playing, let's say you hit the score of 20 and you get 1 point for it, then you'll say 20 for 1, right? Or let's say you're about to hit 31, then you'll say 31 for 2. And if a player says go, then the other player can say 1 for the go if he's claiming the point from laying down the last card. Or he might also say 1 for the last, right? If the other player has not laid down any cards, then 1 for the go or 1 for the last are just essentially different ways of announcing the same thing. That the player gets 1 point, right? So this isn't really too picky. You just announce the cumulative value of the cards on the board whenever you play. And if you are scoring any points, you announce them as well. So scoring during the play. So let's just talk about what happened here. So this is really confusing here because I was just talking about a pair, right? I said if you play, let's say a 5 on a 5, you score for a pair. Okay, and that's true. And that's for scoring during the play. But you can also score for your hand. And so let us continue playing. So we'll actually go over the score afterwards. I'm not going to go over it right now. Okay, this is actually very important. This is very important. So I will have to go over it right now, unfortunately. Although it is a bit confusing because there's not a demonstration currently going on. During the play, so ignore this about Santa's hand. During the play, if you get the total to exactly 15 by adding a card, you score 2 points. Okay? This didn't happen, unfortunately, in the last round. During the play, if you add a card of the same rank as the card just played, you score 2 points. Okay? If you add a card of the same rank as the last 2 cards, you score 6 points. If you had a card of the same rank as the last 3 cards, you score 12 points. So let's say how this go down really? So let's say Santa played a 5, then I played a 5. I'd score 2 points for a pair. Then Santa played a 5 on that pair of 5s. He'd score 6 points for a 3 of a kind. Then, if I played another 5 on that 5, I'd score 12 points for playing a 4 of a kind. There's also scoring for a run. So you score 1 point for each card in the sequence. And so the cards do not need to be in order, but they do need to be all together. So let's say we have 8, 6, 7, 5, or 8, 7, 6, 5. Those can be rearranged to make a sequence of 5, 6, 7, 8, right? And so if you play a card as part of a sequence on the board, you score 1 point for each card in the sequence. So if there's this 5, 6 that exists on the board and I add a 7 to it, right? And it has to be a sequence of 3 or more cards, right? So not 5 and 6 by itself wouldn't count. But let's say there's a 5 and 6 on the board, I add a 7. Well, then I'd score 1 point for 5, 1 point for 6, 1 point for 7. And we'll have to go through this doing a demonstration after just so I can talk about it as we play. And then finally, you score 1 point if you played the last card, but it's less than 31. And you score 2 points if you play the last card and the value equals 31. Right. And so it's worth noting that even though all face cards count as 10, you can't create a pair with face cards unless they have the same face, okay? So you can't, say, place a king on a queen and score 2 points for a pair, okay? Even though they technically both are worth 10, you have to place it on the same face, right? A king on a king, a queen on a queen, and jack on a jack. For sequences, an ace is always low. You cannot turn the corner, right? We talked about sequences as 3 cards that they don't have to be in the same order, but they do have to they have to be arranged in a manner such that they have to be able to be arranged in a manner such that they are in order, right? Essentially, if you have a bunch of cards that can be arranged in a sequence, and you have 3 or more of them, then you score for a sequence. And an ace and a king can't be used to create a sequence, so you can't turn the corner in cribbage, right? That's a phrase known as turning the corner in card games, and you can't do that. It's also worth noting that you can make points in many ways with the same cards. So if the cards on the table are an ace and a 7, and you lay down a 7, you'll get 2 points because 1 plus 7 plus 7 is 15. You got the total exactly to 15. You will also get 2 points because 7 is a pair of 7s, right? You put down a 7 on a pair of 7. So in that case, you would announce 15 for 4. You'd announce the cumulative score and the number of points you're scoring. The play part of the game continues until both players have played all of their cards. The scores are updated as soon as the player gets points, and if a player reaches a target score, the game is finished immediately. In this case, we're not close to 121 at all, right? We're at 10 and 12, so we don't have to worry about finishing the game immediately, right? So scores are updated as soon as you get points, so as you go, rather than at the end of the round or anything like that. So as you saw, Santa was scoring as we went along. But just another thing to really quickly mention here. Once you play all your cards, the play phase is finished, right? So now we're in the show phase. And so that was a long description about the play phase. I apologize. We will do a demonstration. We're almost done talking about the rules here. And so hopefully the demonstration makes it a bit easier. But let's move on to the show phase. So once the play phase is finished, or the second phase, we move on to the third phase of the game. That is the show phase. So once the play is finished, the players take their cards back from the table, right? So notice how I picked up my cards from the table, right? In this case, you can't really see the table anymore because it's blocked by this screen here. But you calculate the score for your hands and the crib. This is always scored in the same manner. Okay? The pawn's hand, or the non-dealer's hand, the dealer's hand, and then the dealer's crib. As before, the scores are added to the scoreboard as soon as they are calculated, right? This is consistent for all of cribbage, meaning that, let's say, you know how we're counting the opponent's hand first, right? Because we count the opponent's hand first, then the dealer's hand, and then the crib. So we'd count Santa's hand first, then our hand, and then the crib. If we count Santa's hand and he magically gets to 121, we don't even bother counting our hands, right? Because you add the scores as you go. So, as before, the scores are added to the scoreboard as soon as they are calculated, and if a player reaches 121, the game is over immediately, right? So the other player won't get to count their score. This means that there's no chance of a tie, or of both players going over 121 in the same round. This is because we are always counting the scores one at a time for each player. The dealer will normally get more points since he scores both his hand and the crib, but the pawn scores his hand first. So if they're both close to 121, the pawn might win, even though the dealer would have gotten more points if he were allowed to count them. So that just shows, right? It's about who scores first, not who would have scored the most. Now, in terms of the scoring for the show is similar to the scoring for the play, but with some important differences. The starter card is used here with both hands in the crib. So, starter card is the card on top of the deck here, right? Notice how the starter card is considered as part of Santa's hand. Right, we noted that Santa only had 4 cards in his hand, but its starter card is still considered part of his hand, right? There's 3 of clubs here, as we can see. And it would also be considered as part of my hand as well, right? So the scoring for the show is similar to the scoring for the play, but with some important differences. The starter card is used here with both hands and the crib. So each player's hand is the hand plus the starter card. And the dealer's crib is the crib plus the starter card. Right, so my crib, I have 4 cards, and I also have my starter card, the 3 of spades. So the 3 of spades, or the starter card, is counted in all hands and all cribs. All cribs is sort of counterintuitive because there would only ever be one crib, but sort of, I hope you get the gist of it. And so you can use the same card for many different combinations, okay? Similar to the play, right? Remember how we just talked about that example in the play? Let's say there was an ace and a 7 on the table, and you put down a 7. You get 2 points for getting it to exactly 15, and you'd get 2 points for playing a 7 on a 7 or a pair. So you'd announce 15 for 4 because you scored 4 points. Similarly, the same card can be used for different combinations in the show phase as well, right? So the play and the show phase are consistent in that the scoring mechanisms are really the same. And then as I go through this, you'll see that much of the scoring I'm about to announce is similar to the play phase. It's just that in the show phase, it's sort of looking at your hand afterwards, right? And so in the play phase, you get points for playing strategically. In the show phase, you get points for your actual hand, okay? With a bit of strategy, considering that your hand is determined by your crib. Now, after we go through the scoring, you'll sort of see why it's important to choose specific cards for the crib. But that was sort of just me randomly choosing cards at the beginning. So let's go through the scoring here. So there's a name. So if you have a jack of the same suit as the starter card, you score 1 point. So the starter is the 3 of clubs. So if we have the jack of clubs in our hand, right? Unfortunately, we don't. Then we'd score 1 point. Okay. Or if we have the jack of clubs in our crib, we'd score 1 point, right? So essentially, the crib is it's like the dealer has 2 hands here, right? So the dealer scores for 10 cards, and Santa scores for 5 cards. So once again, what we're talking about in the show, right? We score for Santa's hand first, or the non-dealer's hand, then our hand, and then our crib, right? But the actual scores I'm mentioning here apply to both the hand and the crib. Once again, similar to the play phase, if you score 15, if you have any combination of cards that sum to 15. So, notice that you can reuse cards, right? So in this case, Santa has a 2, a 3, and a jack that sums to 15. Well, then he can swap out one of the cards. Then he has a 2 of clubs, a 3 of clubs, and a jack of spades that sums to 15, right? So it's any unique combination that sums to 15, not unique cards that sum to 15, right? Because you can reuse cards as long as they are part of a different combination. Combination being a group of n cards that sum to 15, and a different or a unique combination being such that one of the cards in the sequence of n cards is altered, n representing an arbitrary number of cards. Now, You can also score for a pair, right? So in this case, we see Santa. He has a 2 of hearts and a 2 of clubs, so he scores for a pair. So it's similar to the pair phase in terms of scoring, right? I have a 10 of hearts and a 10 of spades. I score for a pair. In this case, I have a 3, a 4, and an 8 that add up to 15, so I score 2 points for the 15 as well. Now, you can also score what's called a 3 of a kind, and we went over this before. But that's if you have 3 cards of the same rank, right? You can also score a 4 of a card, and that would be 6 points. If you have a 4 of a kind, right, that's 4 cards of the same rank, similar to the play phase, that's 12 points. Now, if you have a run, I mentioned this is in play phase, but we can really see it here in the show phase here. Now, if you have a sequence or a run of 3 or more cards, you score 1 point for each card on the sequence. So I have a sequence of 3, 4, 5. I get 1 point for the 3 of clubs, 1 point for the 4 of spades, 1 point for the 5 of hearts. I score 3 points there. Finally, if you have a flush, so if all the cards in your hand are of the same suit, you score 4 points. Okay, so these 4 cards all have to be in your hand. Okay, you can't have 3 cards in your hand, then does the starter card count as a flush? So let me just give an example here. Okay, so let's say Santa had 4, let's say this was a 2 of spades and a 2 of spades, even though that's not possible. Let's say he had 4 spades here, he would score 4 points for the flush, right? But if he had a 2 of spades here, and then a 3 of spades here, that wouldn't count. The starter card, the arbitrary starter card, can't be used in a flush, okay? In any other scoring mechanism it can, it counts as a normal card. For the flush, just for the sake of it, these are just the rules. It can't be used, and it can't be counted in that regard. So, one more restriction. I previously stated that the crib and you score the crib and the hand the same way, right? The crib counts as sort of another hand, but there is one exception that I forgot to mention here. And so I do apologize, but just like how the starter card can't be used to score the flush, okay? A flush also can't be scored for the crib, okay? It can only be scored for the hand. So let's say I had 4 diamonds here in my crib. I wouldn't be able to score the flush for it. It's only for your hand. And the reason is the flush is sort of supposed to be based on probability, right? The crib, it has sort of a human influence on it, right? Because you put 2 cards in it. So that's not really probability based. So that is why you cannot score for the crib. The flush can only be scored for the hand. Okay. Finally, there are certain things called skunks and double skunks. A skunk is if you beat the other player by over 30 points. So let's say, essentially, you'll have 121 or more points, and the other player will have 91 or less points, right? Or sorry, less than 91 points, right? So in that case, 121 minus any number less than 91 that is greater than 30. In that case, you win by a skunk. You win by a double skunk if you win by over 60 points. And typically when people play Cribbage, they play multiple games, right? And they keep tally of how many games they win. And so if you win by a skunk, it's seen as winning 2 games, right? So you win an extra game because you beat your opponent so bad. If you win by the double skunk, so with a 60-point differential, that's seen as 3 games won. Because you beat your opponent so bad, your performance was so well, you're rewarded with winning 3 games. So that's just for your own personal play. That's not really something too complicated. So that's actually it for Cribbage. A long set of rules, but we'll sort of breeze through them with a demonstration here, reiterating each rule as we go. And note that with any game, and this especially applies to Cribbage, there are variations in how people play. Okay, these are a set of some of the, I guess, most standard rules that I'm going through. There are also a sort of a number of arbitrary rules people use. And we're actually sort of just sticking with, I guess, standard rule here. And obviously the cribbage board in itself is sort of used to measure, your progress as you go, right? So typically you'll have holes in here and you'll move along as you go. Now, if you don't have a cribbage board, that's totally fine. You don't actually need a cribbage board to play cribbage, right? It is typically played with a cribbage board though. It sort of adds a bit of fun to it, right? When you see the other person advancing on the board, right? You see the other person's pegs sort of moving on the board, and it's sort of, I don't know. When you see them getting closer to the end, it sort of gets more intense versus just seeing a number. But obviously, that's sort of, some people might think that's too much work, or they simply don't have a board. So feel free to just play tallying normally as you would. But the board does make it fun though. So without further ado, let us continue playing. So we'll continue playing this next round here. Once again, each player is dealt 6 cards, right? Um, Remember, since I started off as a dealer, right, that process we established of coming up with the dealer, that's only for the first round, right? For the subsequent rounds, you alternate, right? So since Santa's a dealer, it's Santa's crib now. And so what cards would I want to send for the crib? Well, the crib is going to be scored during the show. So I want to send cards that won't benefit Santa in any way. So what I'm going to do here is, I know that I have a pair here. I have a 7 and a 7 here. So I'm not going to send those. What I'll do is I'll just simply send the 3 and the 5 there. Send them to the crib. Actually, the 3 and the 5 will send them to the crib. Now, it's my turn because I'm not the dealer. I cut the deck. And I reveal the top card of one of the cuts, right? And that top card will be used at the end of the show. It's my turn to start. I'll start off by putting a 6 on the table. And I announce it. He plays a 10. He gets it to 16. Okay? And so now I'll play a 7. He plays a 4. I can't play. I have to say go. He plays an ace. He gets 1 point for playing the last card. Okay. Board values reset to 0. That's my turn. He plays a 10. So I get 1 point for playing the last card as well. And so notice how the pegs are advancing as we go. So now let's calculate our score here. So my hand, I have 2 6s here and 2 7s, so I get a pair. Santa gets a 15 because he has cards that add up to 15. He has cards that add up to 15, and he has cards that add up to 2 in his hand. And he also has cards that add up to 15 in his crib, and cards that add up and a pair in his crib as well. So I probably missed some cards that add up to 15, so that's actually my apologies. I am not the best Cribbage player, but you can see it's rule heavy, but the rules sort of translate between the phases, right? The play and the show phase, the scoring is so similar, and these rounds are so fast and quick, right? Notice how quick these rounds are. So what do I want to send to the crib? So 9 and 6, that's 15. 9 and 6, that's 15. So I want to keep both of these 9s, okay? It'd typically be one of these cards that I'll send to the crib. And I'm thinking that I'll send the 10 to the crib. And I will send the queen to the crib. And so that's what we'll send to the crib there. Okay. So Santa's going to cut the deck, reveal one of the top cards of one of the cuts, right? So he plays a jack, the total value is 10. I'll go ahead. I can't get this to 15 in any manner, actually. So I'll play a king. Total value is 20. He plays a 10. I have to say go. So Santa got 2 points there. Okay, now it's my turn. Play 9. He played a 14. I'll play a 6. I'll play a 9, right? So I get 1 point for playing the last card there. Now we calculate the score. Santa actually got a lot, right? Santa had a 4 spades in his hand, so he scored for a flush. He also had a sequence. He could also score 15s, right? Because you can, only one card in the combination has to be different. So as you see, you sort of just have to look at the starter card as well, first of all, and you have to have knowledge of all the combinations, right? A good cribbage player is just one who is able to see all the combinations that are possible, and so in this case, Santa is actually doing way better than I am, unfortunately. But we'll play 2 more rounds here because I think sort of after seeing me play, you sort of understand the hang of it, right? So now we alternate Santa's the dealer, says Crib. So what cards would I like to keep here? Well, let us sort of see all the ways we can score. It's always good to just know that, right? The good cribbage players know this, and they can recognize it. So let's see, do we have the jack of the same suit as the starter? No, right? Do we have any combination of cards that's up to 15? Well, we have 10 for an ace, right? So we want to keep that 10. We can score a 15 here, and another 15 here. We can also score 6, 8, and 1. Okay, so that would also be a 15 as well. So that's unfortunate. So we'll keep our 4s because we know that we might have we can score the pair as well. And do we have any runs? We can't have a flush here. Do we have a run though? Run is a sequence. We don't have any sequence here that can be made. So it's either simply a decision between giving up between the 10 or the. So we could go with an 8-6 ace or a 10-4 ace. So I'm thinking 10-4 ace is better. 10-4 ace, 10-4 ace. Then we can go 8-6 ace. But we'll simply give up the 6 here for now and the 8 as well. So pick a card, take out the deck. Yeah, so it's my turn to start now. And that's actually beneficial for us because now we'll be able to score 15 with this 10 as well. What I'll do now is I'll sort of play it on a 4. So I'll put down a 4, right? So he scored 2 points for a pair. Notice how we're scoring as we go, right? His score updated as we go. This is what I was talking about, the 3 of a kind. If we play 3 of a kind, right? So if I play a card onto a previously existing pair, I create a 3 of a kind. And so in that case, I score 6 points. So I score 6 points there. Now he played a jack there. I can't play a 10 because it would make the board value exceed 31. So I have to play an ace. And now I say go, right? You have to play. You can't just say go randomly. So notice how Santa has a strategy, right? He played 5 there. So he got 2 points for getting exactly 15 there, 10 plus 5. And then 1 point for playing the last card, right? So Santa is doing quite well. So I scored 3 15s and a pair. Santa scored a lot here with his hand. So the starter card benefited him a lot. And so he also scored a lot for his crib. So Santa's probably going to win this. So what we'll do is we'll play one more round of cribbage. I think the gist is sort of understood now. It's a game that sort of looks difficult on the surface, but once you play, it's really fun. It's fast, right? Like the rounds actually move fast. I'm just talking a lot. I'm thinking a lot as well. So we can get a 15 with the king, the queen, and the 5. So I'm not going to send any of them. We can get a 15 with the 6 and the 9 as well. So that's unfortunate. I guess what we'll do here is we'll send the 2 and the 9 here, right? That way we can get a 15 there. I would have liked this 15. Unfortunately, actually, if we send the 2 and the 5, well, that's not 15. Okay. Yeah, so we'll just send these to the crib there. Wait, no, we're not going to send it to the crib. Because we can score a flush if we have 4 of these cards, but we lose out on the 15. We can still get a 15. Okay, you know what? Whatever. We'll keep the flush here. I can't play these as well. We'll play 2 for exactly hitting 31. 4 for 3. I'll play 9. Santa's going to get 1 point for playing the last card. Let's calculate the score here. Okay, Santa got a ridiculous amount. So Santa's just really good at this game. Right, once again, 15. If you have cards that sum up to 15, any unique combination is scored for. If you have a pair of cards in your hand, that's scored for. If you have a sequence of cards, right? If you have cards that can be arranged into a sequence, that's scored for. And my hand was so bad, I only scored a flush. So maybe it's like sometimes you gotta think, right? Sometimes a flush isn't the best thing to go for. I scored a 15 in my crib, 15 in my crib, and a 3 in my sequence. Okay, so how do you know if you're actually doing good in the game? Okay, so we'll conclude it here, but just one more thing. The dealer has the crib, right? And so that's additional cards that the dealer can score. So the dealer should always do better than the other player, right? So notice how I only scored 11 points despite being the dealer, and Santa scored 14 points. Santa destroyed me this round. He did way better than me, right? Anytime the dealer scores less points than the opposing player, that's a sign that that player is very, bad at cribbage, right? And if you also think mathematically, right, the player who puts down the last card on the board gets a point. And so if you add up your math in your cards and you can space it and play them such that you'll always be the player who plays the last card, right? So in this last round, Santa got 2 points, right? He was the player who played the last card initially, then he was the player who played the last card afterwards. Sorry, um, we had a round here, right, where Santa played the last card initially and then the last card afterwards. And so that's possible in cribbage, right? You should sort of just have to. It's a game of thinking. It's a game of math. It seems hard, right? Remember, you don't need a cribbage board, but if you do, you can sort of see how the score is going as you play along. Sort of makes it more intense, right? So we can see here Santa's peg is way farther than my 2 pegs, and so he is way farther, right? He's ahead of me in that regard. Um, so that's it for how to play cribbage, right? This is a sort of a longer video because cribbage does have a lot of rules, but they're simple rules, and some of them are really repetitive. The actual gameplay is fast, as we saw here. I hope this demonstration worked. I hope you enjoy cribbage. Maybe get it as a Christmas present. And that's it. Thank you for watching.